Okay, so looking at the skull in lateral view, you can see you've got the nasal at the front, you've got the maxilla with the tooth row, so that's the alveolar process of the maxilla. You've got that anterior nasal spine there, just inside the edge of the nose. Maxilla is pretty large, you can see it going all the way around here. You've got the suture here between it and the zygomatic. The zygomatic has sutures also with the frontal and with the temporal here, so you can see this line. So that piece in front of the line is the temporal process of the zygomatic, and behind that line is the zygomatic process of the temporal. And that whole together forms the zygomatic arch. And you can see the path that the temporalis muscle would have to take to get down to the coronoid process. This is the temporal fossa with the temporal lines that you can just see there. And you can see they're stretching across frontal and parietal mainly. That's the coronal suture. You've got not the easiest in the world to see, squamosal suture. You can see the pterion back here. So this surface here is going to be the greater wing of the sphenoid, in that space there. You can see, going back, you've got the asterion back here. So between the lambdoid and the squamosal, parietal, temporal, occipital. You've got the mastoid process, styloid process. You've got the external acoustic meatus. You've got the articular tubercle. So that's going to be one of the attachment sites for temporomandibular ligament. So that would go down across the neck of the mandible. So if you put this and this together, you can see this is the TMJ, and that lateral ligament runs down like this. The styloid process to the angle is going to be the stylomandibular ligament. And if you look here, you can see that point? So that's called the spine of the sphenoid, and that goes down to the lingula, and that makes the sphenomandibular ligament. Okay, so far so good? Mm-hmm. Right. These pieces here, so if this is the greater wing of the sphenoid, this is the pterygoid process, and you can see that's the lateral plate of the pterygoid process. The medial plate would be the one next to it. So both together are called the pterygoid process. And
lacrimal.
So lacrimal, you find lacrimal by looking for this hole here. So that's where the lacrimal sac is going to sit, and that hole it opens up into is for the nasolacrimal duct, which carries on down to just below the inferior nasal concha, which is this bone here. It's a separate bone. And so the tears, when you cry, sometimes they just go into your nose, and then your nose runs at the same time. And the upper scroll you can see there is the middle nasal concha, and that's actually part of the ethmoid. The line in the middle is the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid, whereas the piece down at the bottom is the vomer. So I kind of moved from lateral view to anterior view.
Where's the ethmoid bone?
So if you hold the skull like this, my fingers are touching the ethmoid. It's orbital surfaces, whereas this is the orbital surface of the frontal, and that's the supraorbital margin at the top of the orbit there, and you can see that notch is the supraorbital notch. Sometimes it looks like a foramen, supraorbital foramen. That's the infraorbital foramen, which is part of the maxilla. Sometimes you even see little holes over here, which would be called the zygomatical facial foramen, which is in the zygomatic. But sometimes you don't see this, but it's all the same nerve really, which is traveling in those holes, and then the mental foramen we talked about just now as the other branch.